So while we're waiting, let me just maybe introduce the wonderful Christine, who will be our rapporteur. I think most of you probably know her, and we are very glad to have her. Hi, Christine.
Hi, everyone. Thank you.
So basically,
I have to have my video off for just a few minutes here as there's a little bit of chaos at the house, but I'm here and actively listening.
Perfect. You're basically my better half.
Yes.
Correcting all the things that I emotionally understand wrong, but being strict and nicely controlling everything, yes?
You got
Wonderful.
it.
So I think, we could maybe also start. Who I also, of course, want to introduce to you is Marie from ELO, who is our technical host. Hello, Marie. We can't see you, but I think that's what we're supposed to, right?
Yes, I'm hiding, but still there and listening. And if you need anything, you can always message me through the chat. I will be the timekeeper, so I will let you know when we are finished. And I let Benedict and Christine lead this fruitful discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I'm basically in charge of telling you when to speak and what to say. But the idea is really that we really talk about solutions here. And that being said, we all know it's a complex topic. But I think what we want to do is, first of all, identify the challenges, outline opportunities, and then, as I said, provide solutions. And I think when it comes to the question, how can we build social awareness and understanding of regenerative agriculture and catalyze support? The task at hand is really to, maybe before we go into sort of the three sub-questions, which I'll read out in a second, think about that first one. Because what I would like to do is go around and have a quick discussion of our understanding of regenerative agriculture, so we make sure that we're all on the same page. So to give you a second to think about this, I'll read you out some of the questions that are basically structuring the next 70-something minutes. So which stakeholders have the potential to have the largest impact on raising awareness and public support? How do we build this, and what can get in the way? And lastly, what are the key next steps to be taken in this area? And this, of course, is just a suggestion. If we feel, or if any of you feel there's things that we want to discuss and that we should add, then of course we'll do that. So I would like to invite you to be as outspoken and proactive as you possibly can, because of course we want to and need to solve this together. Do you have any questions up to this point? If not, we can get going. Okay, not everyone at the same time, but just to maybe a quick word to myself. My name is Benedict. I'm a farmer from Eastern Brandenburg, and we do all sorts of regenerative, multifunctional land use models, agroforestry, syntropic agriculture, holistic grazing, composting methodologies, tree nursery, market gardening, and we do that with around 20, 30 employees. Perfect. In that case, I would like to start, as I said, with, what do you understand? What is regenerative agriculture for you? And I don't want you only to say this, but I also would like your personal idea, your personal breakdown of what is the essence of that. And Owen, I would love to start with you and hear your perspective on this.
Okay.
And sorry, it would be great if all of you who start speaking for the first time quickly state who you are and where you're from and so forth. Thanks.
Sure, yeah. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Owen. I work for Nestle. So very happy to be supporting the event today. And it's an important topic, regenerative agriculture, for our company, because it forms a key part of our climate change roadmap. So my job is to work in the public affairs team on climate change, nature, water, and the interrelatedness of these issues. I do a lot of public engagement, understanding the external perspective on this, and also internal development of our commitments and actions, and where we should be focusing our resources as a very big food and beverage company operating in many countries around the world. We have quite a big impact, and we want to use that as a force for good. So in terms of my understanding of regenerative agriculture, this is driven mainly by our work on climate change. So we look at regen ag as a key driver of potential carbon reductions through changing the way that farming systems operate, reducing inputs, keeping more moisture, more carbon, more biodiversity in the ground, rotating crops and livestock systems, and taking a more integrated approach, which makes the best use of the land.
I mean, yes, you're right. Sorry to disturb, but could you be more specific? Because, like, I think we are all aware of the kind of the keywords. It's more like the process. Like, how do you want to do it? Like, what's your understanding of the technical appliance of regenerative agriculture?
Okay, well, I'm not a technical expert. I won't claim to be that. I'm focused more on the policy side. So how do we develop the right incentives, the right financial systems to reward farmers for investing in these processes, and getting through that transition from where we are now to where we need to be. So as a big company, we're supporting that with an investment ourselves, but our impact is limited without that kind of broader system change. So I'm not coming at this from a deeply scientific perspective, but more of a really kind of leveraging our size and scale, the fact we have many hundreds of thousands of farmers that we can impact in our supply chain. We can provide them with guidance as a company, which is what our technical colleagues do very well. We support them on the communications front, the advocacy front, and the engagement side. So that's where I'm coming from in this debate.
Okay, I understand that. I mean, it's a bit of a difficult discussion, I think, because we kind of need to get to like a real sort of technical definition, I guess. Like, so let's try this in a bit of a different setting. What does that mean for the farmer? Like, if you think about regenerative agriculture today versus what regenerative agriculture is supposed to do for a farmer doing it tomorrow, and like, how would you as a company want to support that? When you say you do a financial commitment, what exactly would you be trying to do, and what would the farmer be doing because of what you do, if you know what I mean?
Sure, yeah. I mean, it obviously we have a very diverse supply chain. So you're talking about many different types of commodity. We're one of the world's biggest coffee companies, for example. So regenerative agriculture, when it comes to coffee, is different to when it comes to dairy or to cereals, etc. So it depends very much on the local context and the farming system that you're talking about. So in coffee, for example, we are helping co-finance the planting of shade trees, because shade trees can help improve yield, improve resilience to a changing climate, and it can also help with reducing the use of certain inputs. But that's specific to that type of farming system, right? So our approach would be based on the local context and the type of farming that you're investing in. And in terms of our role, I think that's something that's evolving, right? So previously we have worked with farmers for many years, but we're taking that up a level. So it's providing, for example, a code, a regenerative agriculture code that we look for in terms of supply chain practices, helping align that with other companies. We do a lot of work with Alice, for example, from Danone on establishing the principles of regenerative agriculture and how that can be applied industry-wide. And in terms of the sort of financial aspect, like I said, it's rewarding farmers for investing in the right practices per to the local context, but that's limited per to our supply chain. So if you really want to have that big impact, it has to come at a broader system level. So we're hosting things like today's event to help facilitate those discussions and align more stakeholders around what needs to happen.
Okay. Jenny, would you like to shed some insight on your definition of regenerative agriculture? Maybe that would be wonderful.
I can give it a go. I'm Jenny Anderson. I'm from an organisation called Really Regenerative. We're a community interest company in the UK, but we work on a global basis, mainly designing learning journeys to help organisations make a shift to a regenerative economy, many of which include food. I've recently published a series of papers called Economy of Place. I'm just getting into food systems now, which you can find on Medium if you're familiar with that platform. So rather than try and give a definition of regenerative agriculture, maybe I can give an example of some of the smaller organizations rather than the larger ones that we work with, some of whom actually might be suppliers to certainly Danone, I think, are those in the US, is what do those food producers come to us as an organization with? The question is, what do we do first? Where do we begin? How do we make a change? And it's very specific to the type of farming that they do and very specific to the geography that they are in. So, for example, a dairy farmer who produces ice cream as a diversification of her dairy farm, a small brand of ice cream, her first question is, our land's not organic. Do we have to first step into getting a certification process to transform our land to organic land? And how long does that take? And what can't we produce while we're making that transformation? If it is a hydroponic vegetable producer, it's a very different question. The question is our system regenerative or non-regenerative? And what could we do differently to make it more regenerative, which is primarily around water use, for example. But if I were going for a definition of what is regenerative agriculture, it is primarily focused on soil improvement, to put organic matter back into the soil, to revitalize and replenish the soil through a structured series of processes that achieve that. And it has secondary and important function to improve biodiversity above the ground, replenish farming systems, such as, I think Owen mentioned, we also work with Cargill, cocoa and chocolate division in West Africa, and that is a social approach as well as a restoration approach to deforested rainforests. So I don't have a simple answer, because there isn't a simple answer, but that's a little perspective from our work, which I'm not sure if that's helpful or not.
No, it certainly is. I think, when it comes to understanding regenerative agriculture, of course, the problem is that we kind of need to get on the same page on that. So what does that mean? It certainly doesn't mean to think that we know what the farmers should be doing, because they most of the time know best. And that being said, I think what we can really realize from the start of the discussion is that we haven't been talking about the farmer so much and the farmer's needs. And I think that is something maybe we should shed some light on. In the end of the day, I think one of the key strengths of regenerative agriculture is to make farmers independent. So I think throwing this into the ground or into the group, I would like to hear if that is something that resonates with you, or you have some experience or something you want to share with regard to that matter of independence when it comes to farming and farmers.
Well, Benedict, if you allow me, I saw that Christine raised her hand, but I wanted to jump in the discussion, because it's such a critical and such an important discussion. Well, my name is Alice Durand-Reville. I work in Danone. I work for public affairs and also institutional partnerships. And I'm now half seconded to One Planet Business for Biodiversity, which is a business coalition that is really bringing together agriculture-centric companies like Nestle and Unilever, PepsiCo, and others, and Danone for sure, Arla, Friesland Campina. So we are getting together because we are absolutely critically aware of what are the challenges that we have to face together, that agriculture together is facing, that we have a critical role to play, and that we won't succeed just on our own. So companies like mine, like Nestle, we are getting together in order to face the challenge. And so what I wanted to bounce back on Jenny comment, because I think that it's at the heart of the question that we have to address today, which is how can we build social awareness and understanding of REGAC and catalyze support. I'm so happy to be here because this is a key question, and for the moment we don't have the answer. And we don't have the answer because, as you showed, we don't, it's such a broad definition. We know that we have some practices, we know that we have some principles, but as it's locally grounded and as it comes from the farmers and on local scopes, it's going to be very difficult to raise awareness of such a complex topic. And this is also what I wanted to exchange with you, because of course we know the practices. I would say that we have reduce or no tillage. We know that we have to favor crop rotation. We know that we have to favor carbon sequestration in the soil. We know that we have to diversify the seeds and also bring more diversity in the crops and in the farming systems. I think this is something that we are all agreeing on, but now how to make it relevant for consumer, how to make it simple, this is quite a challenge. And I'm very happy that we are all together, because we have to make it, because as you know, and as I'm sure everybody shares, if we don't succeed to make it simple and understandable for consumers, then they won't be able to understand and willing to pay and willing to support the transformation. So this is absolutely a key stake. And maybe going back to your question, and I will stop hijacking your meeting, maybe to go back to your question on how does it help farmers. What we saw in Danone in the US is that it brings back their autonomy, bringing that if you decrease their dependency on external entrants, if you base on their knowledge, and if you help or contribute to those knowledge sharing, and you build more value in the food, so you build better prices and you reduce the entrance, so you have a better business model. This is what I learned being in Danone from the experience that we have. I hope I answer your questions. Thank you.
Christine, you also raised your hand.
Yes, hi. I am taking lots of notes in my role as rapporteur, but I thought I would also just chime in with some insight that I thought might be relevant. So in terms of defining regenerative, like simply, what I'm hearing and also what I'm experiencing is that it's like very location specific, very crop specific, and there's no simple answers. I think you said that, Jenny, like there is no simple definition because it just doesn't exist and can't exist. But in that vein, I do think that if approaching regenerative ag less like what we did for organic, which was a prescriptive definition of an outcome, and more of a mindset and a process and something like very almost biological, right? It's like growing and learning and iterating. This is something that I feel like could be owned. It definitely is a bit at opposition with this simple, kind of approach, because nature is inherently not simple. It's complex and, constantly shifting. But then comes this group of people that naturally have this mindset because it's the world in which they've grown and operated, and that's the world's next generations. And I know I always talk about them, but it's like, I'm just so fascinated by today's young people who've been growing up in the world that's described as VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. They've been digitally connected for their entire lives, exposed to people and ideas and phenomenons, and so they're actually like hardwired to think in this complexity in a way that, previous generations haven't been able to. And they're building a new world that's regenerative, kind of like by design. They don't have the taxonomy, but they're actually like creating solutions in this vein and demanding it, not just in food and ag, but in other sectors related to this. So I feel like it's not, again, a simple definition, but it's something around how to, instead of saying, this is what it is, this is the outcome and the definition, but rather like really engage and develop the engagement process that's inclusive of farmers, it's inclusive of the next generations. And through this engagement process, the understanding becomes mainstreamed and normalized.
Yeah, I love that idea. And I think the next generation is so incredibly empowered because they already grew up in a world that is really going to pieces. But Julia, I would love to bring you into discussion because of course you are one of the founders of the DEFA, of the German Association of Agroforestry. And I'd like to invite you to just share some of your thoughts and ideas of what you've been hearing or what we've been starting to discuss.
Yes, hello, thanks. Thanks, Benedict. Yes, I'm coming from the German Agroforestry Association. And concerning regenerative agriculture, of course, we come more from the tree perspective, let's say. So, well, from my understanding, it's regenerative agriculture is a lot about circular economy. Like, how can you really use the land or do agriculture in a way that you do it as much as possible in a rather self-sufficient way, and especially in terms of trees, use the many benefits trees can have for the landscapes, not only in economic terms, but also for the ecosystem services that trees can benefit to. So it's also, I think some people said it already, a lot about soil health, about regenerating the soil systems and also biodiversity, of course. So I think that's the perspective that we can bring in, and where we have some interest in, because trees, we do need trees back in the landscapes. I mean, that's obvious. And not only for ecosystem service, but I mean, the way we can use trees is very diverse in terms of producing fruits, producing fodder for animals, in soil protection. So there are many benefits. And I think this is something that can support regenerative agriculture from that perspective. I'm not sure if that's what you wanted to hear, but so
no, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's a component that is not always talked about, because I mean, let's say conservative agriculture is not always about trees. So this is just some component of regenerative agriculture, but I think it's a component that often is forgotten, that trees also can have a lot of benefits for agriculture. And I think it has to be, yeah.
No, I totally agree with you. For me, it's all about multifunctionality.
Yeah, exactly.
But I can already see in the comment sections, by the way, if you open your comment section, you can see notes out of the group, and Marie has already been kind of slightly giving us a hint that we have to talk about the real questions at hand, which we will. But before we do, I really want to kind of bring it all now together and put Dan and afterwards Mark in the spotlight. Dan and so forth, because I mean, I have been asking annoying questions in a sense for a reason, because, it is easy to say, we'll pay for 200,000 trees that our farmers can plant, and then that's a good thing. And it is easy to say, well, we'll support regenerative agriculture, But if we really talk about what we have to do to raise social awareness of understanding also regenerative agriculture, the complexity of it, what that entails with regards to the potential for health, biodiversity, the complexity of life in the rural areas, education, independence, equality. That's what agriculture is about. It's not about spending some and paying for some trees. It's not about saying that we'll help with X, Y, Z. So if we really want to have an impact, if we really want to change something, how can we, in a sense, use communication? How can we speak with still being able to look into the mirror, in a sense, right? Okay. We need an ethics board in those companies, especially when shareholder maximization is one of the the main ingredients of the thinking.
Yeah. Before I answer, I'm going to quickly introduce myself. My name is Dan. I'm a researcher at Bournemouth University, and my background is political communication, and I focus on movements, agency, etc., these kind of things. I think in terms of, I've written down a couple of buzzwords, and like I think Benedict just like put them all together again. I think there's not generally something wrong with them. It's like, okay, we're going to pay for this, and you're going to do this, but in a sense, in terms of like, how do we raise social awareness and like in a communicative practice, I think I'm an advocate of like showing and doing or not telling, right? So if we get communities involved and say like, okay, we need to plant trees, we need to do these things. If we make farmers, if we make sure that farmers are members, active members of the community, and are like seen as such, and not just, let's say, providers of products to companies, corporations who then turn these things into food, we're gonna create a sense of agency, and that in itself raises social awareness, right? And it's also like what Alice said in terms of that we need to get a simple message, and I think Christine also like pushed back a little bit on this. I'm not so sure if we need a simple language, but that we need it can be complex, but it needs to be clear, right? I think people understand the connections of what happens if we farm a certain way, right? And this might be different. Like I live in rural Dorset in the south of England, yeah. So the connections to the land are very different here than they might be for someone who lives in the middle of Berlin or in London, etc. Right? I think in terms of raising social awareness, I think seeing regenerative agriculture in practice is what raises social awareness. Seeing things work out and happen. What I think Julia mentioned earlier, a circular economy. And I think this is where this comes in. It's not just a circular economy, but a circular local economy, right? So, and this, I think, and that obviously coming from a political communication perspective, this makes more sense to me as like, as a function of something, creating something within a polity that we all have an interest in together. So I think in those terms, once, and this sounds a bit, I usually try to avoid this, but it sounds a bit holistic, but in that sense, once I can see this is how we're doing things. I'm literally looking out the window, I'm seeing across Dorset, they're all agricultural fields, etc. Yeah. Once I get a connection to this, like, okay, I know how the local farmer works. Yeah. I know how the local farmer is integrated within a circular economy or the local economy. Yeah. Then I automatically create an awareness for that. And then that also then translate as a general environmental awareness, how I then connect this to the greater issues of climate breakdown and these issues. In that sense, and I'm not sure if I'm making sense, to be honest. I think building awareness is like showing the practice of something that works. Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of communication campaigns and advertisement campaigns in that sense, in a traditional sense.
Yeah, I feel you. I think. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you brought in some really interesting points, especially the part of experiencing. So actually, coming there, and I think that is one of the crucial parts that lost connectivity to nature and natural processes. So part of our task at hand is probably also to say, how can we build that gap again, and how can we build that bridge again? And I think what you also meant is sort of the idea of commoditizing, right? Which I think will be an interesting topic to talk about with Owen or Lise also. But Mark, I would love for you to kind of wrap up before we really get into the questions that we're supposed to talk to. supposed to talk about, because you of course have a very broad view of I mean, you're the spider in the web, right? So maybe just share some of your insights and maybe bring it together.
Yeah, I'll try, Benedict. And so Mark Tidrington, Forum for the Future of Agriculture. Few people around the table know me, and I just point that out because they will know that I'm as much a theoretician as I am practically involved in farming. And it's interesting you started with that question, Benedict, about what do you define regenerative agriculture as? So I was talking to our farm manager behind the house here this morning, and we were saying that it's for us, it's about restoring and enhancing the land that we manage. And in that context, we look at it primarily through the prism of soil health, but also what we can do in terms of the biodiversity ecosystem services that sit around it. And many of the practices that been done out the back here have been mentioned around the table already, and won't necessarily go into them. They are focused on soil health, but they're also focused on the broader sustainability of the farm. What we were discussing was that it really needs to be outcome led rather than a prescriptive do X, Y, and Z. You tick the box of the menu, and therefore you are now a regenerative agriculture farmer. To one that is a farmer that delivers outcomes that benefit economically, environmentally, as we've already talked about, and climatically. And so our conversation from there kind of extended to, well, what are our concerns about that, and what can we do to overcome them? Well, the concerns about that is that if we get prescriptive menus, we are following a menu that's been handed to us, which touches on your independence point, Benedict, which I think is a very fair one, which is that in order for me to deliver against that menu, I may have to use certain farm management systems, I may have to use certain machinery, I may be prescribed in terms of the inputs that I need to use. Again, I'm not me, but the farm manager has really got the best view on how to deliver the outcomes that we're after on that land. So how do we deal with that? And how do we become more outcome focused in terms of what we have to deliver? Putting the farmer in an autonomous position where they don't feel they have to join one program or another in order to be considered to be this regenerative farmer. The other thing that clearly gets in the way is then, okay, if we go down that track, how can I valorize what I am producing and ensuring that what I've delivered off the land, I'm going to get that fair value for, not just in terms of the core product, but in terms of the way that it's been produced, so that supports me economically to not only pay for the practices that I have done, but also to invest in the way that I'm going to manage the farm in the future. And I don't know if that's helpful to people, but I thought that was a really interesting perspective that the guy here has, and certainly resonated with me as I was preparing to come into this discussion this afternoon. So I don't know if it helps, Benedict, but I've tried to answer the question that you very legitimately threw down.
No, it's great, and it's beautiful to listen you speak. I wish I had this beautiful English accent fluently. So that was very nice. Although I have to say, the problem is that we have to differentiate between the level and the farmer as well as the industry. Because on the farmer side, you're 100% correct, absolutely. But the problem is that the reason we are in the situation that we are is because the system was broken, and the system has been designed partly by the industry, also politics, also some historic reasons, because we had hunger and things to deal with. But this sort of system focused on short-term profit maximization, cutting costs as much, standardizing, monoculture, etc., that is what brought us in the situation that we are in. So we cannot expect the same system to get us out of it, right? So we have to talk about the systemic change, and that has to be as free and flexible on the farmer side. But that ultimately means that industry has to change their thinking, their way, their calculating of costs, their calculation of the development of the customer, right? And that is really what I fear so much. You know, we can say, oh, that's regenerative, but what does that regenerative mean? Is it digitalized agriculture, still monoculture, GMOs, synthetic inputs. That's not regenerative agriculture. That's not going to help anyone. It's going to make you even more independent, even more dependent, right? So that it is really important to draw a line and make sure, you know, how can we bring in those two levels of the same thing. I saw some hands come up. Christina, you go first.
I think somebody was before me, so I can wait. Okay, well, I just have this like natural reaction when people say that, you know, regenerative does not have to include technology or GMOs because it creates, you know, kind of this like framework where farmers are dependent on players. I think if we reframe, I really loved your quote about we can't expect the same system that got us into this mess to get us out of it, but we can reframe how all of this technology is deployed, owned, etc. There's a lot of, and this is what I mean about next gen approaches, because there's a lot of really interesting like open source models that are like out there. There's also a lot of really interesting, you know, GMO products that are actually focused on indigenous crops or heritage heirloom varieties. So it's not like, I just want to point out, like, it doesn't have to be business as usual, but we can still use technology in these systems.
Absolutely.
In a positive way.
Yes, of course, absolutely. But today, still 90% of the innovation is being developed out of an exploitative understanding of ecosystems. Like that, there's not much discussion about it. But you're totally right. I mean, technology is going to be an insane instrument, but only if we start looking at the root causes of the problems. And the economic system is part of that root cause, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But you're absolutely right, Dan.
Yeah, I like shifting discussion to like systemic view of the problem. I know I've got a list of like notes and stuff I've written down earlier, and I like
Professor.
Earlier in the keynote or like in the introduction, it's like in terms of like farmers, land, in a systemic way, like a phrase was used, natural capital, right? And natural capital obviously gets us in a mindset of, okay, capital ownership, etc., right? And I think in terms of like understanding what kind of terminologies are we using, right? Like, do we think of land as owned, or do we think of land as the commons, right? And that then also links to issues of are we trying to get people engaged as consumers, or are we trying to get people engaged as citizens, right? So if we think about, is the purpose of regenerative agriculture to be sustainable for the planet, yeah, and to feed people, or is it a way to create sustainable, primarily sustainable profits, right? And that also then links to how it's easier, I think, to raise awareness and to get people engaged when they are communicated with as more than just consumers, yeah. And that comes also, I think that links to when we talk about innovation. I think we should think of innovation more than just technology. I think we should think of innovation as knowledge, right? And there are groups and there are stakeholder groups who can help to innovate, not through the technology they have, but through the knowledge they have, right? And that way we can connect indigenous groups to the land, we can connect indigenous practices to farming practices globally, yeah? And we can do certain things more efficiently. We don't have to rely on technology. And I think thinking about, especially when we talk about stakeholders, who are we talking to, and who can we see, who of those stakeholders is also a source of innovation? And that's not just in terms of resources such as capital and technology, but resources of knowledge, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great addition to the discussion. Alice and Mark, I didn't see which hand went up first, but I'd love to hear what you guys think. You know, who are the interest groups and the stakeholders to have that potential to raise their awareness, and who do you trust to do this?
Go ahead, Elise.
Maybe if you agree, Mark, I would like to go first because I asked a question in the chat for you, so maybe you can answer also. I just wanted to bring a little practitioner point of view here, because I'm not a farmer, but I'm definitely a company and leading an international coalition. Of course, Benedict, we all agree that the food system is broken, but I believe that taking into consideration the huge impact of industry, you can just throw it away and say, you know what, they can't help. I think that honestly, we can help, and we are decided to do it, and we are trying to really gather all our forces together. So please don't throw us away with the baby and the bath, because I believe that it would be depriving the discussion of quite important actors. My second message to you and to all of us is we only have 9 harvests left, which is that we have to rush. And so in Danone and in OP2B, we have been really working on this question of scaling up, because the real problem is not how we are going to do independently. The real problem is how we're going to massively scale up. And to massively scale up, you have to really go you have to have subsidies. Sorry for this, but the consumer cannot be expected, especially, and it has been said in the beginning, especially the more modest countries, the consumer won't pay for all the prices. So we have to reinvent the whole system. For sure, we have to pay for ecosystemic service. We have to reintegrate the externalities in the food prices. And today, the price that you're paying for the food is not the right one. So we have massive issue there, and we have to be able to face them and scale it up. So just going back to the question of definition, there is a lot of literature. We are not there yet, but we have, and not we, but the scientific community has listed some practices. I quoted some of them. They are not applicable in every country, but they are basic. And then you have some very important principles that come with improving the income of farmers, improving the biodiversity, and I can put you links, and I will do for sure. My pledge here is first to answer to Mark. We have to go to practices, because our experiment is when you want to measure outcomes, the problem is that the outcomes come after 5 to 7 years, and the transition is taking heavy capital. And so you have to really incentivize the farmers and help and support the farmers into doing practices in the first step, and then go to outcomes when we are able to measure. But today, my knowledge is that we are not able to measure it in order to, we are starting valuing it. Now we have to have a baseline, which we don't have, and then we have to be able to measure. So my only plea here is, let's go to finance and align on practices. We won't be perfect, but we have to act. So let's not be perfect. Try to do the best we can, measure it, finance it, and we will do better afterwards. Sorry, and thank you very much.
No, that was wonderful. I think that humble approach of saying, you know, we don't have all solutions yet, and we still have a lot of things ahead of us, is something that is especially important for the communication towards the consumers. Mark, over to you.
Yeah, so I mean, a couple of things that people have said. I mean, I would imagine most of us around the table don't believe that you know, economic sustainability and environmental sustainability are mutually exclusive. And I think, you know, even when we talk at the absolute farm level, you know, certainly we believe that environmental sustainability goes hand in hand with economic sustainability, and is indeed the pathway to it. To your point, Alice, about, you know, measurement, yes, I mean, if I put my another hat on, I would absolutely agree with you. But the danger is that we kind of get locked into a prescription which says you've got to do X, Y, and Z, and therefore, again, you know, back to I think where Benedict was coming from, the farmer is servicing somebody else's outcome, where the knowledge actually lies with the farmer. So I think there's a question about how do we make sure that the knowledge that sits at the farmer level, the guy out the back here, he's been doing this for 20 years. He knows exactly what he's doing. Can he improve? He'd be the first to say that he can improve. But how do we ensure that that knowledge is properly disseminated? And then
Good.
I think the build I'd make on that, which I think came up a little bit earlier as well, is that if I have to do it to something that's prescribed from a digital perspective, or I've got to grow to a protocol that might come from a company like Danone, for example, again, I'm servicing that, and that may be okay if we're sharing the value equitably, which we may or may not be doing today. That's an open question. So I think these things are all the pieces that are in mind when we talk about regenerative agriculture, and we think about it from the farmer point of view. Is this going to lock me into something that is defined by somebody else, or something that I own and am empowered to experiment with in order to deliver the right outcome? So that's where I was coming from with that. And final point I just make on this is that it's that innovation point. And I think we just all need to be honest here. Are we innovating for the business models that have existed, or are we innovating for future business models? And sometimes at the farm level here, we're getting the technology that somebody else wanted to give us, rather than actually what we would need to drive regenerative agriculture. Now, again, a few of you know me around the table, and I've got a few different hats on. I'm just sharing a perspective from the farm level. I could argue in different ways with other hats on.
No, I think that's such a valuable point. I mean, this is what I think every day. All the products that are being offered to us is to sell a product. It's not because someone asked me what I really need, right? But Owen, you also want to contribute something.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of come back to the questions really, which is around which stakeholders have the biggest impact on raising public support for these concepts. And I agree with what Dan said earlier about showing rather than telling. I mean, that's always more powerful to show examples of where things are happening on the ground and to get the voice of the farmer, etc. But I also, a lot of my job is about balancing pragmatic communication with difficult concepts, complicated concepts. And I can tell you from a corporate perspective, trying to explain complexity associated with agriculture is a non-starter, right? When it comes to kind of broader public communication, it's sort of you narrow the funnel immediately down to a group of stakeholders who really understand it, and many of you on the call will be in that group. But we really need to have a much broader impact, much wider impact on societies. And when we do our message testing, as soon as you go beyond very simple, easy to understand concepts, you lose people very, very quickly. So I don't have a direct answer to this to propose, but it's really my experience that getting into all this complexity. What do you mean about regenerative agriculture? Give me an example. Scientifically, what does that mean? This is a non-discussion when it comes to consumer communication. It needs to be much more simple, and that's fine, because then you go into the more complicated arguments with those who you need to have those discussions with, right? So I think if you're talking about which stakeholders have the largest impact on public awareness, companies can play a big role, because we do have, we have these big advertising machines, whether that's desirable or not, I think that's a discussion kind of for another day, but they exist and they have huge reach, and we want to use that to help create system change. And you do have to make it simple, you have to make it accessible and applicable to the local context, wherever you might be advertising or talking to people through your brands, etc.
Yeah, I mean, that's so valuable. I think that's why we need companies like yours so desperately in this discussion, and also, of course, for the global reach that you have. I do have to think about Patagonia when I listen to this, because I remember Patagonia labeling one of their jackets, and it actually said, "Don't buy this jacket." So imagine you would do an analysis of all your products and then have a recommendation that comes from the heart with regards to buying that project or not, because it might be developed or produced in a certain way that might be so beneficial after all. But that, I think, is probably a discussion for some time else. Jenny, I'd love to hear your perspective.
I just wanted to make Sorry, Owen. I just wanted to make a comment on Patagonia as I work for them, and share Yvonne Chouinard's, who's the founder's perspective on regenerative agriculture, and which you can find on record. I'll find the link for you, and that is one around scaling, which is the way in which Patagonia approaches regenerative agriculture and its supply chain, which is mainly around sourcing cotton, for example, is to say and recognize that it is a small farmer process in the global south where they source from, and that scaling needs to be done from a process of federating small farmers to support them to work better with large global brands, rather than taking the approach of scaling regenerative agriculture through large corporations. So the role of a large global corporation is to support the development of smaller farmers to continue to exist as small farmers, rather than to force them into a process of growth. But I just wanted that wasn't originally the point I was going to share, but as you mentioned Patagonia, I'll just share that.
Yes, I think that's so valuable, because I think sometimes, you know, the hype of regenerative agriculture has become so big that it's easy to jump on it. But I mean, I am a farmer, like I know how hard it is. I wouldn't call myself a regenerative farmer yet. It takes years, and it takes money and time and effort. And we are far ahead of being able to do what we want to do until 2025 or 2030, because it's insanely complex, and most farmers are 50 or 60 years old. And so that is very interesting level of looking at it that you mentioned, Jenny. Thank you so much. Dan, over to you.
Yeah, just quickly reply to Owen said, like in terms of like yes, Nestle, for example, has a big like corporate comms, advertising budget, etc. But this is exactly what we meant, what earlier meant with like localizing. For example, obviously Nestle divides the world into or the market into regional, sub-regional. I think the biggest or the smallest regional unit is probably either by language or by state, I'm assuming, to which you advertise to. But in terms of communicating to the public and raising awareness, I think if you would structure an awareness campaign or awareness strategy around local areas, for example, regenerative agriculture for Dorset could mean something very different and could be explained in a local context, complex, but yet people will understand it because they've lived here. Differently, for example, to, let's say, the northwest of Scotland or the southwest of Germany, the Black Forest, etc. So that's what I think people understand complex issues when they see them happening in front of their own door. And then obviously, if we try to explain to an individual regenerative agriculture, how it works globally, that of course becomes too complex. But if I go to an individual who, let's say, lives here in this area, it's like, okay, this is what regenerative agriculture means for this area. I think then it's like, okay, yeah. And then all you have to do, you have to transplant or translate it into another context and say, okay, this is what regenerative agriculture means here for the kind of agriculture we are doing here, right? So, and I think obviously that needs resources, and obviously that's difficult to do because it's much easier to have a national campaign to either raise awareness, etc., or sell products than obviously having things locally. And I think a good example of this, I think if anyone wants to look into this, is, for example, how local infrastructure projects are advertised and awareness raised of these issues, right? So local infrastructure campaigns who try to, okay, we're trying to build this, company tries to build something here, this is what we want to do. So I think in that sense, that's maybe how Owen and I could agree on.
I love this point, and I see Christine also right strictly away. And I would love to give this straight to Alice and Owen, because just summing it up from my understanding, and I think it's really interesting, is to say, you know, by breaking it down sort of more, the complexity down on a regional level, on an experiencer level, decommoditizing, sort of being able to relate to it somehow, because you can maybe drive there or you can see it, and this way also actually understanding what is happening in that context. Is it, do they really mean it? Do they really stand behind it? Does the biodiversity increase? Does the soil get better? That would be a fantastic way of doing that. So maybe breaking down on a region or on a product of a certain region. And so that being said, Alice and Owen, and sorry, Julia, you after or whenever. From a marketing, from a campaign perspective for a company like yours, this is probably a nightmare. So let me know, what do you guys think about this?
Just on a point, just to share a few points, and the one is that also we saw it with Mark. I think that we have all together, because it's not companies and, but all together, even in terms of subsidies, we have to totally rethink the way that we approach things. And for instance, for innovation, we have to be able to build a framework that will be much more bottom up, much more on basing approach, basins meaning a small scope, bringing all the actors together in order to innovate and understand locally and really promote this very small scale approach. And it's totally different on what we have been doing up to now, which was of course something very global, going to everywhere. This being said, I just want to highlight something to you. There is one actor that is missing in our conversation, which are the authorities. I'm not comfortable at all as a company to be advertising on regenerative agriculture, because I know that 100% everybody will accuse me of greenwashing, and rightfully so. So I really would like to have also label regulations, have a clear framework and a transparency framework that against which I can report and say, look guys, I'm really serious on what I'm doing, and this is what I'm doing, and you can trust me, and you can trust me also because I have third parties control. And this is very important, because then thank you so much to give us so much power, but don't forget that we are private sector, and for this we cannot we cannot bear not all the responsibilities, but all the credit. So for sure, super well to do local campaigns and local awareness and we have a lot of pilots and a lot of projects, and Nestle also, and P2B, we have more than 52 projects locally to work where our companies work locally and try to bring that community together, and this is for sure good. But when it comes to advertise, to bring a concept and to bear a concept, then I really plead to have local authorities and third parties to come and really put the right framework in place. And this is also one of my job, and in OP2B we are really advocating in order to have this framework that will guarantee to everybody that we will do the right thing and that we will be recognized for it. Thank you. Hope I didn't answer, but I hope it was interesting.
No,
thank you.
Definitely. I mean, I understand what you're saying as a company with regards to authorities and labels, right? Because it makes your job in a sense a bit easier. But I would like to kind of go, huh?
And it's a question of credibility also.
Well, but that's what I'm wanting to hear. Maybe, and Owen and Julia, I know you also wanted to say something, but the problem though is no one trusts any labels. This is the thing. It's about trust. Like, we have to build trust if we want to change something, right? And that might not be able through a label like this. But I would like to, have Owen's opinion on that, and then followed by Julia.
Yeah, so maybe just a few reflections on that. So I think, in terms of labeling, it's a form of communication, it's a form of engagement, and we don't have too many of them when it comes to a product, right? So you can do an advertising campaign, but that has to really focus on something specific and very easy to understand, as I said before. The packaging itself is a form of communication, but there's already kind of quite a lot of information on there often, on the ingredients, the nutritional profile, the brand itself, maybe other information. So, you're sort of getting to a point where you're going to have labels all over it, and it's going to become too confusing, and people really don't understand whether it's a good or a bad thing that they're buying. So I think this is one challenge. I also think that yes, regulation is one solution, but it's quite a Eurocentric kind of perspective, and in a lot of other parts of the world, we're a long way from that. So we have to allow some innovation to come from the private sector, and we have to, yes, there are pitfalls, of course, and we don't want to see greenwashing and inaccurate communication, but at the same time, if we kind of wait forever for regulation, we may be missing a trick here for advancing the agenda. I see Alice isn't quite 100% aligned with me on that, but there we go. And then the other thing I wanted to say is, yes, I agree with Dan's point about local. It's a good point, and it works in certain contexts, right? But it's a relatively small part of the overall food market that you can do that in. You can do it for certain ingredients in a product. For example, if you make a chocolate bar, the cocoa is clearly not coming from Europe, right? But maybe the milk is, and then that milk can be produced through a regenerative, dairy system at some point, and you can tell that story. If you get the traceability to a very high level, you can talk about specific regions, perhaps, of a country, and then use that and bring that to life. And we do that in some circumstances. For other things, it's more challenging. Coffee, it doesn't grow in Europe; it grows in certain parts of the world, and within those parts of the world, there are certain origins where there are stories, of course, from the Colombian coffee farmer to the Mexican coffee farmer, there's a big difference and a different background and something you can bring to life. So I think local, yes, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's close to you as the consumer. It may be far away, but a local story nonetheless.
Julia.
I actually wanted to bring an example because Dan said something about how people can believe that something is good if they see it themselves. And there are some junior scientists in Germany that right now started a project, it's called agroforestry monitoring, where they actually bring in the approach of citizen science, where they try to monitor agroforestry plots on different farms together with citizens, which is not directly connected to the value chain of companies selling the products, but still, I think it's an important project, and I'm very interested in the results. I mean, it just started because it shows that how, like, for me, I think we have to remember that it will take time to get people convinced of approaches like regenerative agroforestry, and it's not just about the consumption, but also really to show them, okay, it's also about ecosystem service in the landscape. So it's not just the economic aspect. But now also a different point I want to say now, because someone said something about the credibility of a company. I think this is also has to be understood that for people, of course, it's difficult to think of a company that it is credible or they can believe in a company if they try to do something sustainable, but then you hear stories about the company doing actually something really not sustainable in other parts of the world. I think this is very, especially for big companies, it's very difficult to improve the credibility, but I think I can understand consumers to be very critical about the credibility of companies, because this has to be also somehow connected to the integrity of the company. I mean, of course, it's greenwash. It seems to be greenwashing if they try to fulfill sustainability criteria in one part of the world, but in other parts of the world that is not directly on your doorstep, it seems to be not relevant at all. So I do have to take I want to emphasize that for consumers, it's very understandable that they are a little bit critical about this, especially if it comes to labels. If they have to pay products or a higher price for a product because it's sustainable, but you hear bad stories of a company. I mean, for me personally, I'm also very critical in this, I must admit. So I think this is really essential for companies, that they really have to think about their integrity in the whole world and not in just one country. I think that's really important to consider for me. I think that's something just came up from the discussion. So,
I mean, I think that's also so valuable, right? I mean, Mark, I'm going to head over to you in a second, but just to add 2 notes on this, we've already heard in the introduction the topic of true cost accounting. Yeah. Can we afford not to do that as of now? And maybe even more annoying, the question, do we trust companies that are primarily concerned with profit maximization and increasing shareholder value to have so much potential good and bad things that they can do? So, Mark.
Okay, so I mean, I do try and think about this from all actors' point of view. So farmers, growers, land managers need to be more active in terms of telling the story. We transition fields, not crops. And we've got to get better at doing that, disseminate the information, talking to the communities that, they live and operate in. I think the food companies have got a massive role to play in this. I think the only question is whether or not this is part of their business model or whether it's an add-on for greenwashing purposes. If it's part of it, then I think they can, should, and need to be integrated into the network of developing this. I think government and authorities have got a role to play in ensuring that subsidy systems support transition and enable and empower farmers to do what they do, but they also have a role in terms of educating consumers about where the food is coming from and the price that we pay. And my point, which I put in the chat, is that none of those things can happen in isolation. And if they do, we will fail because we'll all work on our individual parts of it. So if we go at it with openness, trust, and honesty, we might be able to get something going here.
I love this. And I think the only thing I would add to this is, not because I'm a farmer, but we have to put the farmer into the spotlight. The farmers, the people with their hands in the soil every day, these are the people that can do all the things that we want, from climate adaptation and biodiversity and health and rural development and education, equality. These are the people, and they should put in the spot in the spotlight. And how we can do this with all the different initiatives and motives that we all have is the question. But if we do that well, if we do it honest, and if we do it also with humbleness, I think we really have